We were talking about North Korea. Obviously, it's a top-of-mind topic, but we're also going to talk about the Google Manifesto. Right now, we're going to speak to Justin Danhof. He's the director of the National Center for Public Policy Research's Free Enterprise Project. Justin, thank you for joining us.
Hey, pleasure to talk with you, gentlemen.
And you wrote an article about what happened when you confronted Google at a shareholder meeting. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this breaking news about the James Damore, the engineer, being fired from Google wasn't really surprising to me at all when it happened, because I actually confronted Eric Schmidt, the chairman, at the shareholder meeting in June on this very topic. I essentially just laid out the basics that Google as a company takes a lot of public policy and political positions that all skew very far to the left. It's the management of Google, all to a man, skews very far politically left. And so I said, in this environment, this company that constantly talks about diversity and inclusion, how do your conservative employees feel when basically you're giving the middle finger constantly to their worldview, to everything that they believe? Does your commitment to diversity and inclusion extend to conservatives here at Google? That was the thrust of my question. And Schmidt couldn't have been more offended and more put off, and basically said that the premise of my question was invalid because at a science-based institution such as Google, everyone believes essentially what Eric Schmidt believes, that there is no dissension amongst the ranks. And frankly, he said, beyond Google, beyond these walls, in Silicon Valley, we all believe in the same science-based approach to everything, and so there isn't any dissension, so you're just wrong. And
wow.
So what was funny to me about that wasn't that he would be in denial, that wasn't terribly shocking to me, but that I was surprised that within a few hours after the shareholder meeting ended, all of a sudden my inbox started pinging with a lot of emails from people with Google email addresses. And they started saying things like, Mr. Danhof, thank you so much for saying publicly what we're too afraid to say in our own workplace. That you spoke up for a lot of us here at Google who suffer under this same problem. It was almost like I was hearing from POWs or something. These folks at Google, they're literally not allowed to be themselves if they happen to be conservative.
Is that different than many other workplaces or even the country at large? I mean, I think that's why, for instance, Mr. Trump was elected without the pollsters being able to determine what was likely to happen ahead of time, because people were actually even afraid to talk to pollsters.
Yeah, that's right. I think that, what I think it is, I think it's symptomatic of academia bleeding into other segments of society. And in here we're talking about essentially academia taking the next step into the corporate realm, where, this idea of safe spaces, that any conservative thought really needs to be drummed out. On the college campuses, we see this regularly. Now we're seeing it take the next step. It doesn't end the day you get your diploma and throw your cap into the air. Now it's extending into the workplace, and Silicon Valley is probably the tip of where, this is the epitome of the problem and the epitome of this high-level liberal groupthink that really loves the idea of diversity as long as you believe in everything that liberals believe in.
Well, but something I've been saying lately is that the notion of categorical and complete tolerance has to, as a matter of logic, lead to intolerance, because you cannot tolerate anyone who has other than your complete view of tolerance.
That's right. It does have a logical conclusion that I think a lot of the left has reached, and I think that, again, this wasn't surprising, but I think it really, Google is finally getting a lot of blowback for this, and rightfully so, because this is no way to run a publicly traded company. Part of what I explained to Mr. Schmidt is that, kind of like college professors, poll after poll shows, somewhere around 90 to 95% of them are on the left of the political spectrum. It's almost because it's become self-selective, right?
Sure.
I know a lot of conservatives with PhDs who have no interest in going to teach in college. And I explained to Mr. Schmidt, I was like, look, I work in conservative circles in Washington, D.C., and Google has made lots of outreach to, try and have influence here in Washington, D.C., none of these conservatives would ever consider working for you, not even in a million years, because they know they wouldn't be welcome. And so you run the risk of almost, having people self-select out of institutions such as Google, which could harm the company, obviously, in the long run, because, if there is to be diversity that advances something, diversity of thought should probably be at the top of your list. Just simply sitting there and bean counting people by their race, ethnicity, and sex isn't the way to advance thought. Diversity of thought is how you advance thought.
Isn't though this, as you said, it's come to academia, but isn't this larger than academia and Silicon Valley? I mean, this is...
of course. But isn't... Okay. My genuine question is, it's definitely larger than Silicon Valley. Is it larger than the bubble we in coastal towns and in very liberal places? Is it larger than that? I mean, am I to believe that Trump's America in the middle of the country and parts of the South, is that as wildly different than what I experience here in Los Angeles, what we're seeing with Google? Is there this whole different red state that exists in the middle of the country?
I would say maybe in smaller corporations, but I think that obviously it extends well beyond Silicon Valley and well beyond the coast, because if you take a look at who is employed at the top level of major corporations, including we can even take Walmart, you could take Target. They have as many diversity officers as they have vice presidents of finance.
Right. It's
an entire field now, and that again started with academia and has extended out into the corporate world, where there's this incredible push for diversity at all costs. And again, we're not talking diversity of opinion, diversity of ideology, or diversity of thought. We're only talking about diversity of sex, ethnicity, and race. And again, we're not looking at the quality of characters of individual anymore. We're really just focused on the liberals are really just focused on the outward appearance of somebody, and they could care less beyond that.
It is strange. I mean, I see it in my wife is an actress, and I see it play out in her life a lot. And when I go out to read for certain TV shows as a host, I'm not saying this out of bitterness, because I'm fine. My job's fine. My wife's life is fine. But it is strange when you go in to read and they say, "Well, we liked you, but we're looking for diversity."
You're Mexican.
I know, but
you don't look Mexican enough.
Yes, they've directly said that to me. Okay. And I think to myself, well, isn't that in a way doing a disservice to real diversity? You know what I'm saying? Like, by saying we're going to relegate who we hire to a certain race, a certain gender, doesn't that inherently destroy the idea of diversity?
Because think about the quote unquote, true, proper looking Mexican individual that would then get that job. They would, what level of pride should they really have, knowing that it's entirely possible they were only picked for that reason, right? So their individual self-worth is diminished even by getting the role they were looking for. And so that's the other side of this coin that liberals often ignore when they have this push for, essentially quota systems in all aspects of American life.
Justin Danhof is director of National Center for Public Policy's Research's Free Enterprise Project. Are people more able to speak up? I mean, Corolla went to Washington and did a whole
Congress
hearing in front of the House Committee about free speech in college campuses. Is free speech under attack, or are people going to be able to once again enter the town square and begin to express themselves?
I think what we've seen is, Corolla went, with Ben Shapiro. Yeah. It was a great thing that they did. So I think what we're finally seeing is there are a few lone voices in the wilderness that are willing to finally push back. There's folks like James O'Keefe, who runs Project Veritas, who are willing to stick cameras in places and get a lot of attention to this issue. But believe me, on college campuses, it's going to take quite a bit to unring this bell. There's entire institutions dedicated to trying to reinvigorate this idea of free speech, because the problem is, if you actually poll millennials and younger, there are increasing numbers, like approaching half of the millennial age, that say that it is okay to censor speech with which you disagree.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
So that's the problem that we're facing, is that this has been so ingrained through education into the millennial culture that they now don't see free speech itself as a virtue, where
in a way,
every prior generation in America has.
In a way, being a kid of the 80s, it was almost the polar opposite, in that I grew up in the wake of Lenny Bruce, and then the Sam Kinison, Andrew Dice Clay thing.
This is what you and I were talking to a college professor about a couple months ago, which is that the previous generation saw the freedom as the rallying point, the rallying cry, while this generation sees it as tolerance.
But I'm talking about specifically with censorship, in that I honestly grew up in the world of Sam Kinison. Stern was starting to see his censorship in the FCC, Andrew Dice Clay. And so to me, when I was in junior high school or high school, where I was starting to develop like political and social ideas, it was as if it was an affront to me if anyone tried to censor.
Right.
It was like the totally different,
absolutely. Yeah, that was a completely the polar opposite. But Justin, I'm going to have to let you go. I could talk to you all day. Appreciate it. Very interesting stuff. And again, I hate everybody, as I always say. And so I'm interested. I don't pick sides. I'm just interested in our system operating the way it's supposed to operate, and leaving us alone as much as possible, and letting people speak and share ideas. And I thought that manifesto, while I didn't agree with everything he was saying, I thought he raised appropriate ideas and was appropriate for discourse and conversation, not something that had to be censored.
That's right. And I really appreciate you guys letting me on to give my 2 cents on it.
You bet. Justin, I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, man.
The website for this, Justin?
NationalCenter.org. You can also track us down on Facebook and on Twitter at National Center.
There you go. Thank you so much, Justin Danhof. 800